So this is part of our mentorship panel for our Austin chapter mentorship program. We call it Careers in Accounting. So this is part one. Part two will be about another month. And kind of the goal with this panel is to have folks from all different areas of accounting to come and kind of, just tell us about their day job. A lot of folks, they think CPE or CPA, they hear traditional like audit and tax roles, and they don't really kind of realize what all the different things are that are out there. So the whole point of this panel is to get everybody together, hear from some folks who are working in the field and, ask questions, learn things, about maybe something you didn't know before. So with that, let me introduce our three panelists. Our first one is Josh Bennett. Josh is a senior manager with PwC Labs, part of their PwC Labs organization based out of Denver, Colorado. We have, and I hope I don't mess this up. I asked you ahead of time, so don't hate me if I mess up. We have Rubik Urizarian.
That's good.
Awesome. So he is a forensic partner with Crow LLP. Was part of Briggs and Veselka. They recently merged with Crow. So, he's over there now. And last, we have Melinda Gildart, who's currently director of accounting management, financial management division for TxDOT. Comes to us but a year ago you were in Illinois working in government there. So excited to hear about some of the things with Chicago Public Schools and helping to run the state of Illinois. So with that, if no one has any kind of questions, we'll get started. For those in the audience, definitely have some starter questions to get you started, but we definitely want this to be an interactive event. So feel free to come off mute, ask questions. We'll monitor in the chat if you don't want to be one to speak up. And with that, we will go ahead and get started. So Neil's a teacher, so one of his kids want to be part of the panel, it seems. Cool. So we'll start with Melinda. You're kind of in the top left corner for me, so we'll start with you, and all of our panels will go through and answer this. But how did you end up in your current role, and did you plan for this role early in your career?
Thanks, Brian. Absolutely not. I did not, intend on being an accountant. I didn't think about that. I wanted to first be a law enforcement officer, and then a lawyer, and then a teacher. And then one of my undergrad professors just kind of looked me in the eye one day and said, "You don't want to be a teacher, do you?" And I said, "You know what? No, I don't." I've always liked math. And I said, well, let me give accounting a try. And that was 20 years ago. And, I've loved it every day since. So, to those students out there, no, you don't just wake up one morning and have this epiphany that, this is my lifelong dream and this is what I'm going to do. And it never deviates at all. I've taken certain, different paths. I was a non-traditional student. I started off in, my undergrad, and then I stopped going to school for a while and full-time work. And then I got married, had kids, and then went back to school, got my undergrad, got my CPA, and then my master's in business administration. So wherever that path takes you, roll with the punches, but make sure it's something that you really enjoy doing. And at this point, I just couldn't imagine doing anything else.
Awesome. Looks like next, Josh, how about you? Same question. How did you end up in your current role, and did you plan for this role early in your career? Josh, I think you're on mute. Okay, you're good now. I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Brian. So I'd say I took a little bit of a winding path. I definitely did not take the path that I had originally planned for or expected. But the path that I did take is one I'm now very grateful to have taken, because it's led me to discovering a really deep passion for data, technology, analytics, automation that I never really even knew that I had. So when I started in college, initially I picked accounting because it was a safe, quote unquote, a safe choice, and I thought I'd be able to get a job. Discovered, sometime in junior year, I think, that I didn't want to go into audit or tax. And so I added computer information systems as a second major. and ended up going into the group that I started with at PwC, which we had called Risk Assurance at the time, which basically supports the IT side of audits, as well as doing some related consulting. And in my mind, that was a good compromise where I was not completely abandoning the my accounting stuff, but found a place that kind of straddled that realm from a technology context. And so I spent 6 years in that role. I touched a lot of different industries, company types and sizes, gained a lot of subject matter expertise across a pretty broad spectrum of business processes, enterprise risk management, regulatory compliance issues like SOX and HITRUST and SOC 1, and really ultimately how organizations use their IT landscapes to enable and scale their objectives through each of those areas. About 2 years into that role, I started specializing in SAP, which is one of the most used ERP systems in the world. And I came to a decision point after a while where I had to decide if I wanted to join our SAP consulting group, which would have meant weekly travel for me, which was an idea that I was just not a fan of based on where I was at in my life at that point. Or alternatively, to just continue in my current role at the time and just continue having an emphasis or a specialization in SAP. I ended up joining a national group of subject matter experts that consults with our engagement teams across the country on all things SAP, and that was really the best of both worlds for me at the time, because it gave me the ability to continue specializing in SAP while letting me work fully remote, which I really valued that. So I stayed in that role and led that group until about this time last year, where I started having discussions about potentially transferring into the group I now sit in, PwC Labs, which would be a pivot, a career pivot for me into more of the data analytics, automation engineering ballpark. I'd say that was a very difficult career transition decision for me at the time, due to the fact that I'd already made a name for myself as one of the leading SAP experts in our firm, both nationally and globally. And so I felt like, am I giving that up? Am I starting over? But ultimately ended up feeling like the PwC Labs route that I took offered me more opportunity for advancing and developing my skill sets, more opportunity for career growth and progression in an area that genuinely inspires me and makes me very motivated, and the ability to work with more like-minded people who share my nerdy enthusiasm for anything technology and digital upskilling related. And so that's where I sit today, and I honestly couldn't be happier with my decision to transfer. It ultimately, I realized that I found my home, quote unquote, my people, so to say, in PwC Labs, and I'm very grateful for and excited to be in the role I am today.
Awesome, thank you. And Rubik, how about you? Same question. How did you end up in your current role, and did you plan for it early in your career?
Yeah, so early in my career, I guess while I was a student, I knew I wanted to do forensic accounting, mainly because I attended a lot of student organization events, heard audit tax industry people, and I hated all of those things. And then I was in my accounting information systems class, and there was some forensic accountants from KPMG came and were talking about forensic accounting. And from that point on, I knew, hey, I got to figure out how to get into this field. There weren't any internships. Even now, it's pretty rare for forensic departments to have internships, and not really a lot of guidance on how do you get into forensic, at that point, straight out of college. So after a lot of networking and harassing recruiters and people that I'd met from KPMG, I got an opportunity, or I guess the recruiter told me, hey, just get an audit internship and we'll try to get you a forensic rotation. So I did that. Got started at KPMG, did 5 weeks of audit, hated it, 2 weeks of forensic, enjoyed it, got a full-time offer there. From that point on, I worked at KPMG Forensic for 2.5 years. From there, I went to a boutique firm that specialized just in litigation support. Spent about 4.5 years there. Then I decided, I did a big four firm, a tiny firm. Let me try to find a mid-market firm, and joined Briggs & Baselka. and really enjoyed working with Briggs. And we were just agreed to join Crow on January 1. So now not quite in Big Four firm size, but back to a top 10 size firm. So still figuring out how things are there. But so long way of saying I always knew I wanted to do forensic, but in getting to where I am today, it's kind of been a journey on trying out forensic within different size firms.
Oh, very cool, very cool. And yeah, I posted in the chat, but for audience members, if you have any questions, you want to ask anyone on our panel, like feel free to either come off mute in between questions or post it in the chat, and Lauren and I will be monitoring that for those questions. So next question. This is, of course, the Texas Society of CPA. So CPA is the CPA credential is a big topic here. So Rubik, we'll go backwards. We'll start with you. How has the CPA contributed to your own career progression?
Yeah, and really it started for me before I even got the CPA license, but I was in the student auxiliary with TXCPA Houston when I was in college, was able to network there. They had a mentorship program, and I bugged enough people telling them I was interested in forensic accounting, and someone said, hey, we have someone who's a forensic accountant here with KPMG. And it kind of was very serendipitous because I was already talking to people from KPMG. I was set up then with someone who was a director there who became my mentor, and it really kind of helped get me that first job in forensic that I wanted to get. So I think without that, it was always an uphill battle from the beginning on finding that forensic opportunity out of college. But being a part of the CPA Society, networking with other CPAs, and just committing my time to doing that, I think really significantly helped increase my chances there.
Awesome. And Josh, same thing to you. How has having your CPA contributed to your career progression?
Yeah, yep. So thanks, Brian. So obviously, it's a little further removed today than it was perhaps when I started at PwC, but I definitely still feel as though it's been one of the best decisions that I've made for myself in my career to date, because I think it enables me to do is really to better navigate a very common business challenge, which is that it's very often that those in the business and those in IT speak vastly different languages, which is one of the largest barriers typically to the two groups working together effectively. And I feel like my CPA and my initial focus early on in my career on more of the business end has really given me the ability to speak their language, so to say, and understand the priorities and constraints of business stakeholders with or supporting frequently. And that's often a common missing ingredient when working with technology specialists who maybe only have a technical perspective and don't understand how that needs to be married up with the strategic business objectives that we're working within as well. So yeah, I really feel like it's given me the ability to speak to multidisciplinary stakeholders across all segments of an organization, from the executive suite all the way to the back office developers.
Perfect. And Melinda, same question. How has having your CPA contributed to your career progression?
It's definitely an achievement that without having that CPA, I'm not sure if I would have been able to rise to the level that I did. Started my career off as a staff accountant at Chicago Public Schools, the third largest school district in the country. And I was surrounded by CPA. So from the beginning, I had this higher expectation to achieve and to go on and earn my certification. So working full time at the schools and attending CPA review classes at night, I earned my CPA, and literally like 7 years later, I was comptroller. And so that was definitely a path that I know that without having that CPA in my back pocket, would have been a lot harder, especially I mentioned being a non-traditional student. A lot of folks, kind of have the generalization that maybe I wouldn't be able to, put in as much work or, work as many hours as necessary, or, give that extra that would be needed to rise up in that, in the chain there. But I adopted practices from various groups, the IT groups. So I'm very proficient in a number of IT aspects, and also budgeting and traditional finance, debt issuances. So running the gamut, but having a CPA in your pocket and becoming the person that people come to ask questions in the organization, it makes you stand out. And it's an achievement that, absolutely, if you want to rise up in your career, you have to have that.
Awesome. And we had a question come through in the chat from Patrick. He's an incoming PwC assurance associate asking if he should prioritize the CPA since he kind of has ambitions in deal advisory and financial risk management. I feel like we kind of touched base on this. Maybe Josh, you might have the best parallel to his situation, where you started in one area, you moved to another area where maybe the CPA is not kind of the centerpiece of what you do day in and day out, but same thing, like, if you're going to be in that consulting advisory area, being able to speak that language of business is going to benefit you regardless. So Patrick, I'll let you either in the chat, or if you want to come off mute, maybe if you want to elaborate your question, or if you think that answered it, what you're trying to get at.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Cool. Yeah, so I mean, I understand I guess the benefits of having a CPA license, but I know like we're, as a global, like in the financial industry, we're kind of transitioning more towards, I guess, like technological like advances such as like SQL, NetSuite, and instances like those. So I was trying to say, it's like, would it be beneficial to like get a CPA beforehand, or should I prioritize more like with the data platforms such as like SQL and like Python and other like applications like that?
I can try to take that, Brian. I think it really depends on, so it's a great question. I think it really kind of depends on where you want to go long term, which is kind of a hard question to answer, while you're still in college, because you haven't had the opportunity to try different things yet to know what you like and what you don't like. And so it might be very dependent on the group that you're in. I know at PwC, depending on the line of service that you're in, there might be different expectations or requirements for credentialing in order to progress to manager level. And so, to the extent that achievement is important for your career progression, it would make sense to prioritize that. I would say beyond that, like the more technology skills that you gain along the way is just going to benefit you no matter what role you're in, no matter what industry you're in, regardless of how you choose to advance your career. Having technology skills will always give you an edge. And so I'd certainly say don't prioritize those. I would just say you should probably rank order them in terms of how they align to your overall objectives.
And I'll add a little bit to that. I would say really I see the data skills as something that you can learn on the job, and it's going to help you do your job. The CPA is something that's going to really help your career. So if you look 5 years down the road, Josh and Brian mentioned like, hey, some firms or departments have requirements for manager. Imagine you're a manager. If you're a manager who's a CPA and there's a manager that's not a CPA, what is a client going to say? A client is going to look at the CPA who's also good with data as more of the expert. Or if you're bidding a job against another firm and there is someone who's a CPA who's very talented data wise and someone who's not a CPA, that CPA is that universal accreditation there that everyone's going to look to that person as, okay, well, hey, I'm talking to an accountant, this person's a CPA and this person's not. So I think you can do both, and really I'd see it as, for me, with all the Excel and data skills I learned, a lot of it was just Googling stuff as problems came up and you just figured it out as you're doing it. A little more advanced now with SQL and Python and everything, but again, with that, other colleagues I've talked to, a lot of free resources on YouTube or self-study trainings available that you're still able to do a lot of that on the job, where you can do that through the course of work, and then still in your evenings and all that, focus on the CPA as well.
Definitely. And I'll just add that, to myself real quick. One thing to keep in mind, like, technology is always changing, right? Like, there's some skills that like are going to be beneficial no matter what you do. But think about it this way: and obviously the answer is going to be different from person to person, depending on where you want to take your career. But is it easier to be really good at the accounting piece and kind of learn the technology later, especially knowing that like the technology you use today and the technology you might use a few years from now might be different, versus being good at the technology to start and then learning all the accounting and financial and business acumen piece later? So I know in my own career, I started more on the core accounting side and learned the technology as I went. And it's, I think Josh, you kind of mentioned this earlier, when you're talking with that business stakeholder who they don't know the difference between a SQL and a Python and a bot, and to them it's all the same magic black box. They don't care that you can use the black box. All they care about is that you can make the numbers on my balance sheet look correct. And so if you can speak to that end stakeholder with that, that's gonna be a key differentiator when you're talking with clients, working on projects, things like that.
Yeah, I would echo that. Like, I mean, it's kind of a subjective question, and really ultimately is dependent on what your progression goals are. But I've found, certainly in my case, having the business context first has helped me be a much more effective technologist, because it has given me visibility into the other priorities and initiatives that must be balanced with just the pure technical side of things in order to come up with sustainable solutions that deliver value over time. So in my case, I would say, definitely good to get grounded in fundamental, business analysis and financial acumen, and build, as I think it was mentioned earlier, really well, like the technical stuff often will, be added bits and bits over time, just through the nature of your work when you have to figure out something more challenging. And then the other piece is like the level of technology skill that you really need is going to be dependent on your role, right? It might be sufficient for you to just be competent in Excel and know how to use, advanced Excel functions. But maybe if you were in a more technical role, that wouldn't be enough, right? And you would need to know more technologies like SQL and Python and Alteryx and things like that. So I'd say it's very dependent, but I'd say my personal experience has been that getting the business side of things first has been the better route for me, at least.
Awesome. Great discussion. Great question, Patrick. Really appreciate it. With that, we'll go on to our next question. And again, audience, don't be afraid to just come off mute if you have a question, a follow up to something that one of our panelists is sharing. That's what this is about. We want this to be interactive. We don't want to just be throwing random questions at you. But with that, we'll move on to our next one. And Melinda, I think we'll start with you for this. What's something that's either unique about your role or maybe something less well known about it?
I would say overall, I spent my career with governments, special district governments, school districts, finance authorities, municipalities, state level governments. My current role with TxDOT in the financial management division, as you know, TxDOT, we build the roads, but there's just an incredible amount of funds that pass through that organization. And so people, they really tend to think that, okay, this project touches me, or, because it affects them personally. But looking statewide and knowing that we have to account for $7 billion in federal money this year, overall, $12 billion. This is a year, and that's to make sure that people's lives are positively impacted. We can get them where they need to go and safely. But also, it's still a government organization, so you have a certain level of accountability to the public, but we're pretty much churning like a business. We are, we have to produce reports that publicly available. We have to have public hearings, but the difference is that, we do it on a smaller scale as far as being able to, let's say, as we're trying to acquire new staff, we don't have maybe as much dollars to play around with salary-wise because it's controlled at a larger level, but we can offer so many other work-life balance arrangements, alternate scheduling. Of course, state and local holidays are off, but we also recognize that people they have a lot of different priorities now with family. So working from home, being able to telework, having those arrangements really increase morale. So we really take a lead on trying to ensure that our employees have that work-life balance. We even award leave for people working out and exercising and getting fit. So there's a lot of things that we do primarily that will cater to the person, not necessarily just the employee. And being in my role at this level, being responsible for all these different entities that are reportable under TxDOT. It's the financial side, but it's also the personal side. So we want to make sure that we connect with those individuals too.
Perfect. Thank
Oh,
you.
and just one more thing. And as far as acquiring the CPA, we very much support our employees getting their certified public accounting licenses. So we offer CPE. We pay for our employees to have CPE in accordance with their CPA requirements, and also for new CPAs. If you want to get your CPA, we'll manage your schedule around different review courses. We would definitely support you. And at the end of the day, you will be rewarded for earning that certification too.
That's awesome. That's good. That's something I honestly didn't know. Like frequently, like obviously a CPA firm is going to be very supportive and have resources for that. But very commonly you hear in industry, it's very hit or miss. If you go work at your typical industry job, they might provide support, they might not. And I always thought that government was very similar in that regard, but it sounds like that's not the case. Sounds like they are ready and willing to support. So that's fantastic to know.
Yes.
Rubik, same question to you. Like, what's something thinking about, and I know forensic has always been a hot topic, for many, many years, even back when I was in school. Maybe some of the cyber and technology stuff is started to step into the limelight a bit, but same thing. What's something that's unique or less known about your role?
Yeah, so everyone thinks forensic accounting just is all fraud, but really that's a small percentage of what I do. So forensic just means suitable for a court of law. So yeah, it could be someone defrauded someone and then they're going to end up being sued for it. Or it could just be two businesses arguing, and it's more civil litigation based, commercial litigation, where our job is still as a forensic accountant trying to figure out how was party A harmed by the actions of party B. So what happens more often is people sue each other all the time, and it's for various reasons, which a lot of times isn't fraud. If you have a contract with someone, if TxDOT has a contract with a vendor, and they say, hey, you didn't hold up your end of the deal, and because of that, we lost $1 million, then we'd have to go in and say, okay, do we agree with that million? Is $1 million the right number of money that TxDOT lost because of their vendor's actions? So could be not fraud related at all. It could just be, hey, you didn't do your job in the contract. But that's the biggest thing I'd say when everyone, a lot of people I talk to, they say, I'm really interested in forensic. I want to do fraud. It's like, well, hate to break it to you, but it's not all fraud, but it's still very fun because it's still similar in that every client you deal with, it's a brand new set of problems, a brand new set of books or company you're dealing with. And every client is similar in that there's a problem and you're helping them solve it. Sometimes it's fraud related, but sometimes that problem is more civil litigation related.
Perfect. Josh,
and I use TxDOT as an example. I'm not saying they're big in litigation, but since we were talking about them, easy example.
There you go. All right, Josh, same thing. What's something unique or less known about your role?
Sure. So I'd say something maybe a little unique about my new role, at least relative to like what I would consider in like a traditional like accounting bucket. Instead of the core work product or deliverable in a lot of pure accounting roles being analytical in nature, where you're attempting to draw insights or conclusions or judgments or how to treat something based on like historical or contextual or perspective data even. My new role involves still a lot of that, but also an element of creating where we have to, we're given a set of problem statements and have to be able to string together our understanding of how disparate processes, tools, and technologies need to fit together in order to build something and deliver something tangible that actually provides value to the business. So A lot of the same analytical focus as well, but there's also this element of creating and building solutions as well that is pretty unique.
Awesome. And we have a question from the audience from Ashley, specifically for Melinda. Being a non-traditional student with a full-time job and family, what are some resources or support that you found valuable, and how did you balance it all?
It was challenging. It was, especially when my kids were little. My husband worked full-time also. So having reliable childcare was definitely a plus. When I was finishing up my undergrad, my daughter actually went to the preschool located on campus. They had a preschool there. So that was phenomenal that I could, drop her off and pick her up after class. Having that resource, I can't even explain how, valuable it was to me, in allowing me to finish up, balancing it all, just remembering that, you have to make time for family, and even if it's, 15, 20 minutes. When I was studying for my CPA, I remember when we would, get in the car, and this was, I don't want to date myself, but this is when the review courses used to be like on audio tape, and you used to put the tapes, we would put the tapes in the car, and they would, oh, mom's listening to her CPA stuff again. But, anywhere you can, I would have my note cards with me at the mall, or, in a movie theater, or wherever we were going, just, trying to make sure that I was still able to perform on my job, that I still gave time to my family, and that I was still moving forward in my career. It's not magic. Did I make some mistakes? Yeah, I'm not perfect, but my kids still speak to me. My husband still speaks to me. So, just have faith, and you'll get through it. But, it's gonna be pushed and a heavy push at sometimes, but just make sure that, surround yourself with positive folks that are encouraging you to keep going, whether it's on your job, whether it's, your family. Just make sure you surround yourself with positive people that are rooting for you, and have faith. You'll get through it.
And yeah, 100%. Like this is some advice I give everybody that asks, like, when you have the question, what's the best piece of advice you've had, or your favorite piece? It's that support system. That support system, friends, family, coworkers, people you go to church with, that cashier you always see at the supermarket. That support system is going to do so much for you. So make sure you have it. Like, everybody here on the call, you could think of as an extended version of your support system. You can reach out, and maybe Ashley has a question for Sarah. You're both part of TXCPA. You reach out, leverage that support system. Take advantage of it. A question for Patrick.
All right, let's get in the car.
A question from Patrick, I should say. Any thoughts on the new CPA exam format for any of our panelists? I don't know how familiar you are or aren't with it, but just a little bit of background. Essentially, the way that it's set up now is the exam basically going to be 3 core areas, and then the 4th area is going to be kind of optional. With, I believe it's, let me actually look here real quick. I believe it is, let's see, I want to make sure. Yeah, so it's tax compliance and planning, business analysis and reporting, and then information systems and controls. So that's kind of the 3 optional areas, along with the core of what is currently known as FAR and Reg, so and audit. So BEC is kind of being blown out into 3 different areas. So just ideas, thoughts, feedback from the panelists on how that looks, and maybe how for folks who are just starting their career, what's going to be important. And Ruby, how about we start with you on that?
I mean, BEC was the section I hated the most, so I'm glad it's getting blown up. I think for the most part, like Brian was saying, 3 sections are the same. So most of it's the same, but then you just have a little flexibility there. I don't know a lot about each of the breakouts. But I mean, high level, for studying purposes, as long as you stick to your routine, figure out what works for you as far as how often you're studying, what days you're studying, stick to a routine that's consistent and works for you. And no matter what the section is, you can do it. So.
Melinda or Josh, go ahead.
From my perspective, being a government accountant, I also used to be and I'm still on the committee, but I used to chair the committee for GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association. So we work with state and local governments throughout the country and in Canada to ensure that they're have adequate practices for accounting, auditing, and financial reporting. And we did work with the AICPA directly. They came and spoke to our committee and run through the breakout for the new test. We gave feedback on it. Of course, we want to make sure that government accounting doesn't disappear altogether from the CPA exam, because it's very important, not just for our CPAs, but for the public to be aware of where their money goes and how it's being spent. So we kind of lobbied to make sure that, that wasn't removed altogether. We've seen a decrease overall in the number of government accounting courses offered by universities across the country. So we wanted to make sure that it did still stay a component of the exam so that, everyone would value that aspect.
Josh,
Yeah,
anything? Go ahead.
The only thing I would say is, BEC when I took it was kind of like the dumping ground for everything else, right? And so I'm sure from a student perspective, like when you're looking at the CPA, it probably is not something that you get very excited about to see that they've broken it out, presumably, adding more content. But I think it makes sense. Like I think they're trying to align that to where we see, pressing business issues for the profession. And I think it will continue to change over time and it should, otherwise it runs the risk of becoming stale and irrelevant. So could be probably is a little frustrating to feel like they added something to an already notoriously difficult exam. But I'm sure you all can rise to the challenge.
Awesome. Cool. So another question, this one again for targeted for you, Melinda. But I'll give my own short answer to it. So I'm a non-traditional student as well, and I appreciate the explanation on balancing everything. But how long did it take you to complete your education and obtain your CPA credentials? All of that said. So I'll say for me, just to kind of put things into perspective, I definitely wouldn't call myself a non-traditional in the way that most would think of it. But I'll say I was, when I started going to school, I was working full time while going to school. So it took me from my start at community college all the way to finishing with my master's degree was about 7 years. And then another year after that to sit for the CPA. So end to end from the start of my education until I finished the CPA was 8 years. So that was for me personally. Everyone's gonna be a little different. So Melinda, maybe if you want to share a little bit more about your story and kind of what the experience was like for you.
So because I started school and then stopped to start my family, I will pick up from when I actually went back and really hit the ground running. So it was about 10 years between finishing my undergrad and gaining my MBA. I got my CPA first. So it was a little bit of a road. I worked as a hotel turn down clerk. Those are the girls that put the mints on the pillows. And I also drove a forklift while I was going to school. So, it took a few years, but once I got my undergrad, it was 3 years. I got my CPA and then 2 years to get my MBA.
Awesome. Cool. Well, getting close to time. So one last question to kind of wrap it up. And we'll start with Josh on this one. If you could go back to the start of your career, what's some advice that you would give yourself?
I'd say two things probably. One, stop putting so much pressure on yourself, on myself to, have my long-term career progression plan figured out right at the beginning. I know that's probably a common pressure that a lot of us put on ourselves. But over time, I realized I was trying to do that before I'd even really spent the time figuring out what things I liked, what things I didn't like, which is really, going to drive where you want to go long term anyway. So I'd encourage myself to be a little bit more take a little bit of pressure off myself and enjoy the ride a little bit more. And then the second thing I would say is the second piece of advice I'd give myself is to initiate more relationships with people who are willing to mentor and coach you. Because as I have continued in my career and reflected on where I am today, I recognize that I would not be here if not for the people who have invested their time and poured into me and given me feedback, helped me see things that were in my blind spots, helped me get different perspectives on how to view certain things or how to approach certain things. And they have really been one of the most invaluable resources in my career so far. So those are the things I would say.
Awesome. And we'll go over to Rubik next, but I'll just add to that. One big thing to piggyback on what Josh saying that it was hard for me to learn is don't be afraid of titles. When I first started, I used to think, this partner, he's been with the firm 20-something years. He has all this experience, but he's a partner and I don't want to bug him. Well, guess what? Rubik's a partner. He's here now, taking time to talk with you. Don't be afraid of titles. Those are some of the best people. Very often, like folks who are in those high-level positions, not maybe all at once, but they would love nothing more than to answer your questions and help you in their career, because I guarantee you there was probably someone somewhere down the line that helped them get to where they're at, and they're more than happy to kind of push the favor forward. So don't be afraid of titles. Reach out to folks. Rubik, we'll go to you now. Start of your career, what's some advice you would give yourself?
Yeah, so this is actually a piece of advice someone gave me, but I didn't really follow it too much. When my first mentor told me have an exit strategy, which sounds kind of odd. You're an intern and you hear this from your mentor. They're saying, hey, have an exit strategy. But I mean, after working in the industry for 13 plus years, I think it really makes a lot of sense, because it's, you're going to face times in your career where you're going to say, man, this sucks. And I mean, if it hasn't happened yet, it will. You're going to be either a client you're dealing with or a particularly busy time, and just know that, hey, have an exit strategy. Know what you're doing, why you're doing it, but also know, hey, I could be doing these other things. If I'm really miserable, I don't have to do this. Guess what? Right now is the best time to find a job in accounting. Everyone wants to hire you. So, it's kind of it's hard to think of it that way when you're going in, as an intern or a new hire, and you say, oh, I'm going to be here forever. Most of the time it doesn't happen. Most people will go through several different jobs, firms, etc., throughout their career. And early on in your career, for me, going to KPMG was the best thing I could do out of college, because that's who was offering forensic accounting jobs. But right now, KPMG is not the best place for me, at this point in my career. At least that's not how I feel based on what I want to do. So, be selfish, think about your own career, think about those exit strategies. This kind of dovetails on that advice of getting that CPA early on. Because once you have your CPA and you're also developing those data skills, like, you're going to be like the most attractive candidate to anyone out there. And that's giving you that flexibility. So when you do run into that crappy time during your career, you can either say, hey, is this worth me staying here? Do I need to find something else? Or is this just a rough patch that I'm going to get through? And this is really the best place for me at this point in my career.
And Melinda, to close this out, same thing. If you go back to the start of your career, what's some advice you would give yourself?
Overall, I would say be patient. But then on the flip side, I would say you did good. Remember the path that I took to get my CPA. So when I finally got my certificate, I was very, very happy. And I just knew that things were just going to take off. They didn't, not immediately. And I remember going into the CFO's office at the school and like, hey, I have my CPA now, ta-da, and what's coming next? And he's like, well, we don't really have anything for you right now. So I left and went to another agency who made me the controller. And guess what? A couple of years after that, the schools hired me back for his job. I went back as the controller for the schools. So the person that I was sitting across from and saying, hey, I'm good now. I have my certificate. I'm ready to work, and that person retired, I end up sitting in his chair. So never be afraid to shoot for what you want. Yes, patience is always something that you want to fall back on, because things are not necessarily going to happen when you want them to. But when you really feel that urge, when you really feel passionate about something, go for it. Always go for it, and make sure that you do your best. Don't half-ass it. Just go for it, because if you don't, no one else will. It's on you. You drive your career. No one else is going to make sure that you end up where you want to be. It's all on you.
Perfect way to round out this panel. Well, awesome. We're right about at time. So to our panelists, thank you very, very much for the time. Lots of fantastic advice shared. I'll just real quickly ask for those still in the mentorship program, if you could just stick around for just a few minutes, and we'll have our little regroup session. For everybody else, I hope you enjoyed the session. If you have friends that missed out on, unfortunately, and kind of want to hear a lot of this great advice, look for it. We'll be posting it soon on our YouTube channel, along with a lot of our other previous panels. So with that, I thank you everyone for your time, and have a great day.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for joining, y'all.
Thank you.